Hello, welcome to my channel. Today I'm doing day number 3 of the Metatron Meditation Challenge. Um, my voice is still crap, but I'm feeling pretty good, and I am very, very grateful that I'm able to do this. Um, yeah, again, yesterday's video did not come out very, very well. The conditions and the oh, what's it called? Because the way it turned out just wasn't very good. I don't know what was going on. It looks a little bit better today. I hope that it will stay that way. But I'm going to go ahead and get started and read you today's meditation. This is day number 3. It's January 13th, 2026. And I started by saying, will my voice get back to normal soon? I am so tired of being out of commission for 6 weeks every time I catch cold. And Ramon says it will, it always does. You just focus on getting well, not on the lack. I said, I'm trying. Ramon, it is good to hear you again. And he said, well, logically, yes. You have been hearing me for the past 5 months. How else do you think that you learn the cards so quickly? Logic is not just how I groove. And I said, you groove. What an interesting word choice. And he says, well, it is applicable, then it works. The act of logical thinking not only helps you to learn, but it enables you to find the balance in all things. Think about it this way. You asked a question based on logic, in this notion that is all things can be answered in a similar fashion. As you received the answer, you carried on in a methodological way. You said that through the adaptation of wisdom that you were able to predict future events, outcomes. It is a psychic link, but it is also the notion that you can use your logic to foresee conclusions. It is not measured in how smart you are. It is instead measured in how you look at history and use it as the basis to infer what will come. And I said, it is like predictability of a story, of being able to assess that a story will have a certain outcome because past stories had the similar outcome. This suddenly makes sense to me as to why I have been more interested in stories and less in the news or what is happening in the world. Ramon says it is indeed. You remember that quote from Einstein about repeating something in the hopes of a different result. Well, here is the same concept. All of these stories have building blocks. They are comprised of the same elements. 1. The idea of someone who is down on their luck. 2. A person with the means in which to change their current reality. 3. An internal desire to not be a charity case. 4. The person with the means of assistance trying to prove their assistance is not consumed with pity, but rather seeing a person who conveys emotions or attitudes that they wish they had. Rinse, repeat. The concept of it is the same. What captures your attention is not that they came together, but the route in which they go from hopelessness to hope, from sadness to joy, and how that concept, although thrown into a blender and mixed together 20 ways till Sunday, creates that sense of hope. Why do you suppose you are captivated by that concept? And I said, I guess because I like to see people succeed, especially if they are good or have good or noble intentions. And Ramon says, it is more than that. You are, uh, like many light workers, patiently waiting for karma to do its dance, to see the good people be rewarded and the evildoers to get their comeuppance. The problem is, the karma of fiction and the karma of reality do not parallel. We see this beyond the veil. We can completely understand why people are becoming despondent. The fight in them is literally falling falling aside in a reality where people with full wallets and empty hearts are reigning triumphantly, while those with full hearts and empty wallets are being beaten down. The one thing that you must understand, those with full hearts will always be able to carry that to the other side, whereas those with all the money in the world are mortal. They will one day leave the realm of physical reality and enter into what is often called eternity. Do they get to take their money with them? Will they be able to see what lies beyond their physical reality? This is the lesson in all of this. A full heart is far more significant than how much material wealth one has. When you go into a life review, you can remember one day when you were had $20 in your pocket and gave the lot to a man or a stranger who was stranded with a little boy. I said, "You saw that?" And Ramon says, "Yes, I did. I saw how you were with a group of people who had more money than you, but you offered help to a stranger while they did nothing. They had more material wealth than you, but yet you showed the man that you understood the notion of being stranded." I said, "I was a student back then. When I told a family member about it later, they harped about how selfish I had always been." Ramon says, "That was projection. You saw that later, but you took it to heart and continued doing good deeds for others. You never once questioned the action of helping. You merely helped." I said, "I often wondered what happened to him. Did he pay it forward?" Ramon said he did. He was not a poor man, but he did not forget your simple act of kindness. You see, people pass in and out of your life, and they are affected by the acts of grace that you share. I said, "Grace, I always like that word. It's not just a name, but an idea of doing things through grace, regardless of the outcome." Ramon says, "That is the meaning of the word. You look for moments of grace because it's far better than living in a reality that is embodied in negativity." I said, "Is that why I watch or listen to stories?" Ramon says, "Yes, because you have ceased to see the idea of grace, of kindness in the world, the notion of doing kind deeds for others without expecting reward. You offered your home to a friend in need, never expecting a reward. You did kind things for others, only to be insulted or put down for those simple acts. But you never got tired of helping. You merely decided what people you wanted in your life and what people were not worth your energies. Those were the ones who were not worth fighting for. You you let them go. That based on expectations or the notion of being related by blood does not mean that you must continue to accept their abuse. In time they will be put in a position where they must accept that their actions reaped consequences." That is what all of this is about. The stories, your fascination with them, the ideas of people changing and growing based on one simple encounter. When you walked away after helping that man, you felt like you felt light, good. I said, "Yeah, I did." Uh, and and in terms of how that made me feel, I felt rich and blessed. I did not have to get anything in return because good experiences came back to me. It was like that song, Chain of Love. And the song goes, "Don't let the chain of love end with you." That is what the song said. And that ended up being something profound and beautiful. Ramon says, "You have the answers as to why those stories were significant. If human beings can see that meaning, they can change, then the changes you wish to see in the world can become more than just a story. The only thing that will distinguish the two would be the words 'the end' at the end of the story." I said, "Yes, but that will have no end." "No, life as you know will have an end, but the soul's journey will continue on to infinity." I said, "That sounds beautiful. It feels almost like the day's connection is like a story." And Ramon says, "Except this one will never end unless you decide for it." And I said, "That's really a great rationale for my love of stories. I just wish that humanity can learn and understand the overall impact of the choices made." Ramon said, "It is like Karen said yesterday, all things are vibrations. What you do also leaves vibrations, ripples that affect others. The vibration of music, the impact of a story, and the actions take from whatever they might inspire and are the vibrations. They may seem small and insignificant, but they are not. They are like the child who was able to eat because you gave his dad $20 that not only bought food but put enough fuel into his car to get them home. I said, I never thought to ask about the impact of that simple act. And Ramon cuts in and says, that act of grace. And I said, okay, you said it. What it did, I just knew that it felt right. Ramon says, it is generally the people who do good deeds because they have enough empathy to see that not only can they relate to others, but they can understand that their actions have impacts on others. You could imagine how they felt because you had felt what you yourself felt. I said, I remember what it felt like to go hungry or to live on tuna fish and rice, having to eat on one side of my mouth because I had such a extreme toothache that I could not afford to see a dentist. I said, being told that I was offered wasn't good enough because I was poor and they were not. All these experiences, all these events made me realize that I had been jaded by the negative words, but it did not stop me from trying to make a small difference where I could. I know I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes, but I also know deep down inside that I have always tried to give what I could, to share what I had, and to try and help when I could. The funny thing is, I always knew that tuna and rice were not good, but it was all I had. I never forgot the response, but I think after leaving the college and those people behind, I understood the notion of grace far better than I had ever could have. It was what inspired me to help a stranger in need and to later accept that one could either accept what is offered in grace or turn away in arrogance. Ramon says, it was one of the greatest lessons in your life. I said, indeed, it was. And while I had that feeling, I understood later that this experience defined for me who my friends really were and what sort of people I wanted to be around. Ramon says, that is a quality that makes you endeared and remembered on this side. And I said, thank you, Ramon. And he says, and so it continues, that grace and gratitude. That's where we ended. So, yeah, I had not really thought about that experience that I had, but I will never forget it. I never forgot it. I had gone with some people from the university to lunch. We had just left the restaurant. We had come outside, and a man approached us, and what I remember about him was he was tall and he had a little boy, and the little boy was like pulling on his arm. And I was walking with these other people in this group, and all of these people, I mean, they were more prosperous, I guess you could say, monetarily well off than I was. I was just simply I was just simply there with this group. And what happened with that was he comes up and he says, I don't want to frighten you. I mean, he started off straight off saying, I don't want to frighten you. He said, but I'm stuck. I'm stranded. I have no gas in my car, and my son is hungry, and we have no money. And the guy did not look like someone who I guess you could call someone who was homeless, or that he didn't have the markings of someone. He looked like I me like somebody like me who had who was dressed, in this sort of way, but who, the clothes were worn but not old, not frayed, or, so you couldn't really categorize him in a certain, economic bracket, so to speak. You could just see that he was in need of help. And so what I did was, and the other people were like, come on, let's go, let's get in the car and let's get out of here. And I dug in my pocket. I had a $20 bill. And I handed it to him and I said, "Here." I said, "Take this." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because your son's hungry and he needs food." And he accepted the money, albeit reluctantly. I mean, he was like probably looking for maybe like $5 or something. I don't know what he was looking for or what he was expecting, but I gave him 20. And he was very grateful. So gratitude as depicted in the meditation. It was just a moment of grace, I guess you could say. But he looked happy, he looked grateful, and he said, "Thank you so much." And I just said, "Pay it forward." All I could say. And he left, and I went and got in the car, and everybody was looking at me, and they're like, "Oh, why'd you do that?" I said, "Because he needed help." And I said, "I've needed help in the past. I needed, people to understand that I, wasn't full made of money or anything like that. But I did this because it was the right thing to do. And there wasn't some millionaire who came sweeping in and saved me from whatever problems and stuff I had. Those problems were still there. And I mean, I still couldn't eat on one side of my mouth because I had a toothache. I had grown so accustomed over a 7-year period of eating on one side of my mouth because I could not afford to go to a dentist. This was back when I was studying. This was before I met my husband. This was, about 2 years before I met my husband. It was my first year at the university when this happened. I was 20 years old. I was 21 years old. I was working in the work-study program at the university, at the library, and I, you know, I was not getting help from home, unlike the other kids or the other young people that I was with. They were getting help from home. Their parents had money, they had cars and all this other stuff. But I didn't have that. I was just I was just on my own, basically doing this. And my grants and stuff barely paid for the semester at the university. So I would work and everything that I earned would go into rent. Everything I earned would go into paying to live and rinse repeat, that kind of thing. So I was not I was not a wealthy person. I've never been a wealthy person, but I've always tried to do good and I've always tried to help people where I could. And maybe that distinguished me from the other people around me. I don't know. But what I did was I tried to help people where I could help them. And I didn't I didn't care how people responded to me because I had already been through so much in my life that I just decided that I wasn't going to do anything. And as far as the rice and tuna fish thing was concerned, I can tell you a little bit about what happened there. I was a sophomore at the college. I had transferred from a college to the university. So this was before all that happened with the stranger with the $20. And I was studying at college, and again, I was on work study and I was working in the library. And I my mother was paying my rent at the apartment, but everything else I had to pay, and I was living on $50 a week, or $50 every 2 weeks, actually. It was like 25 bucks a week. This was back in 1990 something, back in the beginning of the 90s. And I had some friends, and one of them, I all I could offer them was because I had money was so tight for me, I could only offer rice and tuna fish. And one day, this person comes up and she confronts me about the rice and the tuna fish and saying, "You cheapskate," and that kind of thing. And she basically confronted me about offering them rice and tuna fish when they were offering me. It was like, "You're getting caviar and we're getting rice and tuna." That was kind of the accusation. So I was like, "Geez, I can only offer what I have." that was just it. I could only offer what I had, and that was at the time what I had. And in the end, I just kind of withdrew. And this was like right after my father passed. So I was not only dealing with not having money, but I was also dealing with the grief that I had with my father's passing and being confronted by that. So this was very devastating. This was very, very devastating. But it was a lesson that I learned that money does not determine friendship. It's determined by grace and by kindness and by gratitude. And that if somebody cannot accept what one has or what one offers, then maybe they're not worth it at all. And so that was the lesson. And it was a very, very difficult lesson because it was on top of grieving for my father who had died in 91. I was also, or who was sick. This was during the time when my father was sick and dying. He had lung cancer and he was sick and dying. So this was during the time I wasn't grieving, but I was scared. I was dealing with a lot of fear and insecurity because my father was sick. So, and between the time that I left the college and moved to the university, that was during that summer that my father passed away. And I had other people come to me and tell me, "Oh, they couldn't understand. I'd lost a parent at a young age, at 20, and they were still being nasty to me because I reminded them of people that they had passed in their lives." And it's like I couldn't help it. I couldn't change the fact that I was grieving. I couldn't. But it was like everybody sort of expected me to move on, even though I was still in terrible, terrible grief over my father's death. So there was a lot of stuff happening during that time. And there were many lessons that came to me, and they just came one after the other. And they were all about how to contend with grief and how to address people with grace. And I think that that's what this meditation is really about. It's about looking at life with gratitude and with grace. And that if the people who are around you do not accept that, or to accept you for what you have or what you offer, then maybe they're not worth it. Maybe they're not worth the time or the effort. And maybe letting go is the ultimate outcome. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, and for listening to me ramble about this. But I wanted to clarify what was going on in the meditation and what happened in real life. So that's what happened. So thank you very much. Take care. Have a great day. And as always, namaste.